Hey everybody, and welcome back to Hunters Connect. I'm Luke Kikoli, Director of Conservation Programs, and I'm joined here today with Justin Spring, our Director of Big Game Records. We're coming to you today from the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch and the Boone and Crockett Club's Rasmussen Wildlife Conservation Center. One of the prime species hunted on the ranch are mule deer bucks. So Justin, tell us how we're going to score our mule deer.
All right, so as with all of BNC's categories, we are looking for the typical or the common form of the species. Mule deer buck, this is a great example of a 5x5. You will notice on a mule deer, unlike a whitetail, they have a fork in the back and the front, and then a G1. This is a unique species in that each of these are numbered points. If something's missing, we're just going to put in a 0. So similar to our other categories, the same definitions of number of points and how we're going to do baselines and whatnot are the same. So if you've seen the whitetail videos, some of this may sound familiar. We're going to go through the score chart here step by step, starting with A and working down to the bottom for the final score. And so the first thing we need to do is the number of points on the right antler. I just kind of went over that, but again, they need to be 1 inch long. All these points are greater than an inch, and the length exceeds width at 1 inch or more. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Same thing on the left antler. Again, the deer's left, the deer's right. That's how they're referred to on the score chart. So this is right antler, this is left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The next thing we're going to look at is the tip-to-tip spread. Tip-to-tip spread on a mule deer is going to be taken from the very center of the tip to the center of the tip. We use this sliding carpenter's ruler to make sure we're exactly in the center of the tip. Now, neither tip-to-tip or greatest spread are added into the final score, but we do keep track of these as the records are a wildlife data set. These are useful measurements that we do want to keep track of, but they just are not figured into a final tally. So our tip-to-tip on this buck is going to be 11 6/8. Box C is our greatest spread. Again, it's very useful to have some type of wall, flat, level surface here. Right here we use this little podium. I'm going to line this up. This edge needs to be parallel to the axis of the skull. So axis of the skull is right here. This edge needs to be parallel. We're going to line that up. And what we're looking for here is the very furthest outside edge on this side and this side. They may not be directly apart, so that's why using a wall on one side is very helpful. So now we're going to check a few spots by measuring and see which is the widest.
So here we've basically just set up a carpenter's level with a C-clamp to make our second perpendicular. So we have 2 parallel lines to get our greatest width from, again using this carpenter ruler. If you don't have any of these supplies at home, be sure to check out the link below. We're using 1/4 inch steel tapes, both the clip end and the ring end. We've got some masking tape here, which we'll use to establish baselines and mark points with our pencil later. And we also have flexible steel cable and an alligator or a circuit clip.
So our greatest spread on this deer is actually here. I checked 2 spots. This is the widest, so we're going to put down 20 6/8. The next measurement that the score chart calls for is item D, which is the inside spread of the main beams. The main beams come out the front and on mule deer come forward like this. You want to make sure that when you're taking the inside spread, you are off the main beams. Occasionally we'll see people try to take the inside spread off the G2s. This is incorrect. It must be the distance between the main beams, so that generally on a mule deer is going to put you in this region, somewhat below this G4 here. So when I take this, I'm starting in the center of the beam to the center of the beam. Again, I'm going to use my sliding carpenter's ruler to make sure that I can identify the widest place. And again, I'm taking this perpendicular to the axis of that skull, right at 18 inches.
So I'll mark 18 and 0/8 since we're gonna take every measurement to the 1/8 of an inch. If we end up falling on a 1/16 of an inch, we're gonna simply round up to the nearest 1/8.
All right, so now that we have our inside spread of main beams, next to that spread credit, but we'll get to that at the end once we get some more measurements to verify it's gonna be our inside spread. So the next thing we're gonna look for is abnormal points. Again, this is the typical form of the mule deer. So 5 normal points. Anything that falls outside of this pattern on a mule deer is going to be an abnormal. Anything that's coming off the sides, the bottom, points off of points, you know, additional points off the G2, points off the G3, anything outside of this 5x5 pattern is going to be considered an abnormal. In this case, this is all 5 normal points. There's nothing additional. So we have 0 abnormal points, which is then transposed down into line E on the score chart. So the next thing we're going to do is main beams and length of tines. Before we do the main beams, we're actually going to go through and put all our baselines on. They're very useful in identifying where the beams are. Quickly, when we're doing a baseline, what we're trying to do is identify where this beam would be had this projection never happened, okay? So we're going to cut this point off where this beam would naturally have come had this point not happened. Now on mule deer, different than other species, the G3 actually comes off the front of the G2. So we're going to cut this G3 point off from the parent material, which is the G2. But we're going to go through and go ahead and tape up the right side here first and get those baselines on, and then we'll get back with the length of beam.
If these antlers have dirt or moss or anything stuck on them, this masking tape might be a little bit hard to get on. You can clean them off with steel wool, and then your masking tape should stick a lot better. But we're going to use masking tape for a couple reasons. First off, we don't want to make any permanent marks or even eraser marks on anyone's trophy, but also it's going to give us some good reference lines that we can refer back to for a lot of these measurements.
Only use the steel wool on your own trophy. All right, so now that we've put on the tape, we're going to put on our baselines. Boone and Crockett for the length of tine says it's the greatest outside curve. Commonly on a G1, it's not easily discernible if the outside curve is going to be the front or the back. So we're going to put our baseline on both sides here and test both to make sure we get the longest when we get to that point. Now make sure if there's a curve in the beam, as you can see here, this is not a straight line, so it's not going to be appropriate. Our baseline needs to reflect this curve in the main beam. So as I'm putting it on there, I'm looking at that bottom edge and making sure those two, my baseline and that bottom edge, are parallel. Now in this case, there's a fairly quick reduction in size from the top side of this tine to the lower. We're just going to kind of split the difference there. And again, unique to mule deer, our G3 comes off, it must come off the front of the G2. So when we're putting on our baseline, we're saying where would the G2 have been had this G3 never happened?
And then I'm always making my pencil mark on the bottom edge of our flexible steel cable.
All right. So now that we have our baselines on, we're going to do the length of main beam. The length of main beam is going to start in the center of the beam. It's going to come up here. It needs to stay in the center. So now that we have these two baselines, as that length comes through here, we can ensure we are staying in the center of the beam. Our starting point is going to be the exact center of this antler. To find that, I like to hold it out, extend it out arm's length to where I'm hiding the other side behind this front side. That means I'm looking at it square. I can easily identify the center of the beam right down here. When you hook your cable on the center of the beam, you go right to the center and just hook the lip right underneath of it. In some cases, there may be chunks or something missing or sticking out. Wherever that center is where you need to hook the center of your cable. And you don't push it underneath, you just hook it right on the edge. I'm going to have Luke tape this beam length on so we can demonstrate exactly where this goes. All right, so once we take it out the center, we get to the tip of the horn. We're going to use our circuit clip to mark the very end of that tip. So this is showing where that length of beam staying right in the center of that main beam should correctly fall when taking your length of beam measurements. We're going to remove this, transfer it over to our sliding carpenter's ruler, being careful not to bump our clip.
21 5/8.
That's the right
Right
antler.
antler.
And again, some measurers like to do the beam on the left side. I like to stick to one antler as I go through just so I can keep everything straight on my score chart and don't make a mistake. So we're going to go down now to our G1, which is the length of our first point. As I'd mentioned when I put this baseline on, we're not sure which is the outside curve, if it's going to be the inside or the outside. It is important to remember though, you can never take a length from the bottom or the top, just the center of the front or the back on a G1 or any tine. Again, I'm going to place the non-clip end snug up against my baseline in the center of the projection. I'm going to take that to the tip and mark it with my circuit clip. Again, not sure which one's going to be the greatest. Let's try the back side. That actually is a little bit longer, so that's the length that we're going to use. It's going to be 2 4/8. Our next box is the G2 that we need to fill. And the G2 is this long dominant tine that comes to the back. On a 4x4 mule deer like this, it is always the back tine that's going to be your G2. So for my length of 2, again, I'm snugging my cable against my baseline. I'm staying in the middle of the projection.
13 0/8.
Our next one's going to be my G3. Remember, the G3 on a mule deer must come off the front of the G2. It cannot come off the sides. It must come off the front. And ensure that you're just measuring this tine down to where it meets the 2, not all the way to the beam. It's going to be 6 4/8. Final tine length is our G4. A G4 must come off the top of the beam. So a 2 comes off the top of the beam, a 4 comes off the top of the beam, and a 3 comes off the front of the 2. Seven 0/8. Now that we've got all of our tine lengths done, we're going to switch to circumferences. And on all antlered game, there's going to be 4 circumferences taken regardless of the number of points. On a mule deer, you'll notice on the score chart on a typical 5x5 like this, it tells you where to take them. So our H1 or first circumference is going to be between burr and G1. Again, we are finding the smallest circumference between burr and G1. It's going to be 4 2/8. Our second is going to be between G1 and G2. So again, I'm going to use the ring end tape, work it up and down, finding that smallest circumference. And that's going to be 3 5/8. Now the H3 circumference on mule deer is taken between the beam and the G3. So it's actually being a circumference taken on our G2 tine. And I'm getting 2 7/8. As I said, there's always 4 circumferences. If, for example, a G3 is missing, that circumference is taken at the midpoint of this tine. If a G1 is missing, which is quite common on mule deer, both H1 and H2 will be between the burr and the G2 at the smallest point. That is available on our website if you have any questions, but remember there's always 4 circumferences taken regardless of the number of points. So our H4 is between our 2 and 3, and that's our last circumference on this right side. And that's going to be 3 2/8. So now that we've got the right side complete, we're going to go ahead and tape the left and switch over to that side. All right, similar to what we did on the right antler, we're going to go ahead and put our baselines on this side before we put on our main beam length. So again, I'm going to put this cable right along the top edge of the beam where the beam would be had this tine not happened. And again, taking into account that natural curvature of the beam should be expressed in our baseline. The G3 is coming off the G2, so we're drawing our baseline there. All right. Now again, we're going to start this right in the center of that beam. I'm going to look and make sure I'm in the center there. We're going to hook it on here. Luke's going to tape it as we go up. Again, now that we have our baselines, we can make sure that our beam length is in the center of the beam. So you can see there, we're right in the center, similar to what we did on the right side. And that's your correct length of beam measurement.
20 7/8.
Now, similar to what we did on the right side, we're going to get all of our beam lengths. Again, we're going to put the snug the non-clip end of our cable up against our baseline. Especially on G1s, it's sometimes really nice to have someone to help you put your clip on just so you can get a precise measurement. Gonna eyeball check the other side. That is indeed, the back is longer, so that's what we're gonna use. That's gonna be 2 1/8. We're going to take our length of G2, again on a mule deer, on a forked mule deer like this on the back tine, the G2 is always going to be your back point. We start in the center, stay in the middle of the projection. Our G3 point, right from the very edge of our baseline on the center there. That's going to be 7 1/8. So our last tine length is going to be our G4. Again, very center of that base, snugged up, staying in the center of the projection. That's going to be 6 5/8. Again, for our circumferences, we're going to look at the score chart. H1 is going to be our smallest between burr and G1. It's going to be 4 and 2. H2 is between G1 and G2. That is going to be 3 5/8. H3, again, remember on a mule deer, unlike a whitetail, is taken on the G2 tine between the beam and the G3. So the smallest between beam and G3. It's going to be right at 3 inches. And our final circumference between G2 and G4 is 3 1/8. Now that we've got all this done, Luke's going to subtotal up these columns for calculating the final score. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to check our spread credit. You know, in nearly all cases, the spread credit's going to be the inside spread of the main beams. The only time it's not is if the inside spread exceeds the longer main beam. And since our inside spread here is 18 and our longer main beam is 21 5, As is the case commonly, 18 and 0 is going to be our spread credit.
So I'm going to drop that total of 18 and 0/8 down into the lower left-hand corner. Add up column 1, I'll add up column 2. I'll subtract the differences between column 1 and column 2 to enter column 3, and we'll have a total for us here soon.
All right, so Luke's totaled this one up. Again, this deer final score is 143 and 4/8. The subtotal would be the gross score, which a lot of people refer to as a 146 and 1, no abnormal points. So again, that's a very nice mule deer, you know, classic 5x5 buck. That this scoring can be translated to any mule deer you find yourself trying to score.
All right, everybody, there you have it. That is how to score your mule deer buck. We hope you learned something here today. Again, our score charts are available on our Boone and Crockett Club website. Please reach out to our records department if you have any questions, and they'll be able to answer all your scoring needs. I'm Luke Kikoli. Thanks for joining Hunters Connect, and we hope to see you again soon.